Me
Folks,
ready.
hello, welcome to Talking Crit. I am Eric Tenkar, one of your three hosts with the mostest. Adjacent to me, I'm learning the stage directions. By the way, don't get all excited. Is my once a week work spouse, Bad Mike, and with the weight of the show on his shoulders or the top of his head, depending on how you look at it, is none other than the one and only Jim Kitchen. This is your panel. Live with it.
Evening, all. How are you
Oh
doing?
yes. I made a mistake this week because I thought we had Joe Block on. It turns out we have Joe Block on next week. The Mister Great Hot Grognard. So
Yes.
we're just going to have to vamp all show. I don't know
We're
what
going
we'll
to have
talk
to see
about
if
because there's nothing in game. Nothing has happened in gaming in the last few weeks. So I have no clue what we're going to talk about.
the last time Joe was on, within a week or two after that, he unfriended me, and then he friended me back. So we'll have to see if that's.
Forgot about that.
We'll have to see if that holds true. That was a lot of fun. So we'll have to see if the shenanigans ensue. So.
By the way, and I also got your Diamond. The Diamond Comics saga has taken a delicious turn. Delicious. So for all of us on the sidelines, I would hate to be anybody involved in this absolute. I'm gonna unmonetize you right here, Eric. An absolute clusterfuck. This Diamond.
It is a Mongolian cluster truck of epic proportions.
And so we probably should talk about that at some point.
And as an aside, only one company made a deal.
Yes, I saw that.
Image.
Probably the smartest company there, Image Comics. They were smart, and they said, you know what, we can print more comics. Let's just get out of this. Here's some comics. Here, give us some back, and we're done. We're out of this. But we'll talk. We can talk about that first. I don't know. We can talk about
last. In the hand, two in the bush. Yeah, I know.
Unless Jim has a. I mean, do you have anything urgent?
No,
Jim?
I think
we can talk Diamond early. I don't care.
Well, let's talk about a few things.
Okay.
Number one, I think what we should do is we should lead with what we talked about just before the show started. So Eric, if you didn't know this, Eric made a very great post earlier this week about the OSR and how the OSR began and so on and so forth. And Mike before the show said something that I agree with wholeheartedly, that there should be a history. There should be a history of the OSR. And as somebody who was, for the most part, out of role playing when the OSR first kicked off and so on and so forth, I'm late to the party. I'll be the first to say I'm late to the party, but I think that a history of the OSR is certainly in order. And I think that if you want to know where you're going to go, you have to know where you came from. And I think that you have to properly attribute people and the companies that got you where they did. I'm not going to pull it off the shelf today, but if you look over my shoulder, you can see the Old School Rules Essentials, the two big box sets that are right there. They are very close and near and dear to my heart. Mike probably has a copy.
I'm looking to see what I could get off the shelf, but yes, I have. Yeah. I don't want to get it. It's
that virtual bookcase that's behind me, but really on the other side of the room, the shelf below has my OSC stuff.
Sure. And so I think it is very fair to say that the OSR movement that began, if Osric is the foundation of the tree, the tree is very tall, the tree has many branches, and there are many things that have come out of the OSR movement, some good, some not so good, and some just plain terrible. But I printed it on my mom's copier at work. Don't tell anybody. But I think we have to talk about that because I think that's a great place to kick off the show. We don't have a guest tonight. Joe Block's coming next week. But let's start by talking about the OSR and let's talk about Eric's post and then
Eric, could you just summarize your post because you just kind of laid a groundwork there, and I agree with pretty much everything you posted. I thought it was really good. So just why don't you summarize what you posted?
Now, just so folks know, there's a series of videos. We're talking about the first one, which laid the groundwork, and then after I laid the groundwork, I started going off in all these different directions. Oh, Jesus, thank you.
You're welcome.
I can see it on my screen, but we didn't have it up here.
Well, that's why he's Atlas. That's why he holds us
That's
up.
why the show is on his shoulders.
Yep, that's why he's the Atlas.
If you've been posting in the chat, your words are now visible, folks. You're welcome.
Yes. Oh, my God. So I started outlining the initial history, the beginning of the OSR, and as I did that, I started like picking lint off a shirt. You're like, oh, I didn't. What about that? What about this? And so I have a whole bunch of little things on a sheet that I'm going to probably address at some point. But it was interesting to do the research because OSR, the joke in the OSR has often been, is it old school Renaissance, old school role playing, old school revival? And Rob Conley actually did the research a couple of years ago. We found it. I found it when I was doing my research, and it started out as old school revival, which then morphed to old school Renaissance, and then Fight On magazine or zine is the one that kind of cemented it. So it's in it I am very deep into this, and my history bachelor or bullshit degree is coming into play. So I do these videos at like 1 o'clock in the morning. That tells you how passionate I am when I
It's
do.
powered by caffeine and rage at the machine.
Yeah, you know, like when I was, I'm going to do one on Targa. Okay, I've done my research.
Targa, a lost chapter that more people need to know. Well, maybe they don't need to know about it, but it's
And I want to do one on Yiddish because
your dungeon is my
your
gosh,
dungeon
another
is
lost
up.
chapter of craziness.
Yes, so there's a lot of pieces to the OSR. When it comes down to it, the OSR wouldn't exist without the OGL and the SRD, which allowed Osric to be what it is. And in a way, Castles of Crusades kind of like cleared part of the path by saying, oh, yeah, you can take the SRD and create a new game. And it's like, oh, well, then we can create a new game. We can recreate the old games. And that's the path that was done with Matt Finch and Stuart Marshall with Osric, Gonnerman with Basic Fantasy Roleplay, Proctor with Labyrinth Lord, back to Matt Finch with Swords and Wizardry. And then there's a bunch of stuff that starts bouncing off all these. And I want to do something on the do-it-yourself aspect because, especially during the Google Plus days and the blogging days, everybody was creating content for old school games
for free. It was just up on their blogs. It was in their blogs. It was on. They used to send it in to Fight On. I mean, it was all free. People were like, oh yeah, I'm going to create charts and some new classes and this and that, and you could just have it for free.
And I think that's like I think Green Ronin is the company that brought the very first product out under the OGL rules. They were the first ones to actually have a product for sale at Gen Con after the OGL launched. And when you look at that, when you look at that really great period of time, all the foundations for what we currently see in gaming came out of that, right? That the OGL gave everybody a sandbox to play in, that you didn't have to go to I mean, some people treat it like a labor of love, and some people just make a terrible idea of RPGs. And it gave everybody a chance to play in 3.0 and 3.5 and so on. And that set the stage, and exactly what you said, Eric, the idea that, hey, we can create something new, but we can also recreate something old. And I'm always reminded of zine culture of the 70s, right? That underground publishing in the late 60s turned, if you're a comic book person, you know about the Fabulous Freak Brothers. The Fabulous Freak Brothers was this X-rated underground comic where the characters smoked pot and had sex and blah 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 blah, and it was obscene and so on and so forth. But that underground publishing culture then led to zine culture, which is why we have acres of Spock and Kirk fan fiction.
Oh boy!
But all of this stuff sort of carried through. And if you look at, I mean, this is why the OSR is so important in some ways, because it literally parallels the OSR movement in the 2000s, parallels exactly how D&D came to be with you've got a wargaming group here in Lake Geneva, you've got a wargaming group in the Twin Cities, and they're passing ideas back and forth. And the better run war games have somebody that actually runs a game, and that's a game master or somebody who runs it. And hey, if you want to play this Dungeons and Dragons game, how about we have a dungeon master, and this stuff percolates and gets passed back and forth. And there's sort of a communal consciousness of, hey, this idea works or this idea doesn't work, or I don't want to roll 3d6. I want to roll 4 and throw away the worst roll and blah, 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 blah. And these are my house rules, blah, 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 blah. And then the OSR is pretty much the same. It's that same kind of gestalt of, hey, I've got the idea for this and I've got the idea for this. And hey, I'm going to publish, we look at early OSR blogs, and I think we could spend an hour talking about those that cross-pollinated a lot of these ideas and a lot. Hey, we could do this. We could do this. We could do this. What did you like about Dungeons and Dragons? Well, I liked first edition AD&D. I didn't like the brown box set, white box set. Oh, okay. Well, what about you? Oh, I was a BECMI guy. Okay. And then that sort of self-segregates into columns. But I think, again, it goes back to, what did you play? What did you love? What did you know? And how do you come back to that 25, 30, 40 years later?
Right.
I've been trying to think of a taxonomy. So I look at it this way. So you look at it as Ryan Dancy, I guess he could be the godfather of the OSR, because without him, we wouldn't have the OGL. And without
midwife. He's like the midwife.
Okay, he's not really that. Okay, he's
the midwife.
He's
a great term. He's a very burly, hairy midwife.
Yes, and so then
very good. He birthed it.
Hackmaster and Castle Crusades were distant cousins. They weren't part of the family tree. They were in the family tree, but not. They're kind of off.
They were in the family tree. The thing with Hackmaster is, if your requirement for something that's OSR is either from the SRD or scraping away anything that's recognizable from the SRD, but keeping that core rules, Hackmaster just took the rules under license. So they didn't.
I don't consider them. I don't consider them a retro clone or a part of the OSR because they are. They won the right to publish second edition material from TSR because of the lawsuit they had. And so, that was the idea there that, hey, you could play old school type adventures that in Castle Crusades, but by using the new tools, that are out there.
And in retrospect, like, I consider Castles and Crusades a Rosetta Stone. If you want to play a third edition game module and use it in the OSR, if you understand Castles and Crusades, you can convert it over. It fits in between those two worlds.
It has a foot in each, and it's a great bridge. Now, there's a question in the comments. Is DCC RPG an OSR game?
No, it is not.
I will disagree, because what I will say is, I think the initial wave of OGL is what I will call proto OSR. I think the actual point of here lieth the beginning of OSR is Osric. I mean, we can fight about this all you want, but I think Osric is the one that was like, hey, here we go. Yeah. This is viable. We can do this. I think that Castles and Crusades is what I would call, it's a little later than that. I mean, they first started showing up at Gen Con, I think in 2000 was their first booth. I'm not 100% sure about that.
I think Castles, I had the timeline. I think Castles and Crusades was 2000.
It was earlier than I thought when I looked it up.
Yes.
It was.
Because Osric was 2006.
Okay. So Castles and Crusades is first out of the gate, but Osric sort of clarifies you can do this. Mm-hmm. DCC, I think, is OSR adjacent / Mike calls it a cousin. I would say it's adjacent.
I'll agree with that. I'll give you that. Yes, I think it's adjacent.
And the thing that everybody has forgotten, since DCC, #not a cult, since DCC has really hit its stride, what everybody forgets is how it was originally marketed, which was play like it's 1970 something.
Yeah, it was like what's it? New school rules, but
well, for those who don't know, that what Joe did was when he when he had the disaster of the license for 4E that just cratered, he said, "Screw it, I'm not tying my brand to WotC anymore." He went and for what his words, he reread all the Appendix N books, and he said, "I'm just taking what's in Appendix N." So it's got a lot of weird fantasy, sci-fi, because you look at Appendix N, it's a kitchen sink. It's not just Tolkien and Conan. You have Saberhagen. You have some weird stuff, and so that's what my opinion, Jim, is it's a whole new game. But like you said, I agree it's adjacent, but it's an entirely new game created on the foundation of the Appendix N.
I would say it's it's Dungeons and Dragons like you remember, but is not necessarily the Dungeons and Dragons you were actually playing.
Okay.
You know, I think we all remember it was like the cover of Kiss's Love Gun, or it was like Molly Hatchet's Flirting with Disaster, right? That's what you remember.
And that's a good way to put it, because when I first play tested the beta, I did not like it. I was like, this is a shit game. And then the full rules came out, and I read it, and I was like, I haven't looked at a game like this and felt like this since I held my AD&D Player's Handbook and DM's Guide in my hand.
There's a reason that rule book.
So Joe hit the nail. He hit the notes with that first printing release.
There's a reason that it's a great one book game, because it's a gonzo game, right? It's a gonzo, you know, I have a friend who hates the magic system, hates and abhors the magic system. But just like the regular OSR, the DCC community gelled around the game and has endless fanzines and annual Gong Farmer's Almanac, blah, 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 blah. And it came out of a lot of what I would call the spirit of the OSR. It exists next to the OSR, but it has its own ecosystem of players and fanzines and so on and so forth.
It's never Venn diagram.
Yes.
There's no,
this is a very thick branch coming off of the tree, right? And I think that's fair. I think that's okay. But we look at, again, like over my shoulder, over there, Old School Essentials. You know, Old School Essentials is another big mark on the OSR movement, because when that came out, it has, what does it have going for it? It has amazing artwork, right? It has some spectacular artwork. It has the notion of, I buy this box and oh my God, the box has everything I need in it. And oh wait, it doesn't, because they brought out another box.
Use. It has modern sensibilities in its layout and its organization. Yes, it's BX rules. Yes, it's essentially what Dan Proctor gave you with Labyrinth Lord, but with the advantage of 15 years of the evolution in how to present it.
And I'm a big believer in, number one, the OSR will not die. I'm a big believer. I hear people say, "Wow, the OSR is," and I think that's just no. But what I do think is, just as we all grow older, and as I said, DCC hits the game you remember having, right? Because when you're a 13-year-old and you're killing monsters and getting treasure and sneaking a look at your uncle's Playboy and playing Molly Hatchet albums, like, what you remember ain't reality. But as we grow older and our sensibilities, like, people ask, why was Shadow Dark? I'm going to talk about Shadow Dark for a minute, but why was Shadow Dark successful? Because Shadow Dark is well written. It's clever. It addresses a couple of things. It has the torch mechanic. We talk about this endlessly, and I'm sorry, but the OSR can continue to have new things show up, new things that pull from other sources, and so on and so forth. We talk about D&D, and Dungeons and Dragons magic system is Vancian magic. It's the Vancian magic system that goes through all of Jack Vance's fantasy. I'm okay with it, right? When you look at Harry Potter's magic system is a completely different batshit crazy magic system than Dungeons and Dragons. When you look at at magic systems like DCC and the idea of patrons and so on and so forth, and the disastrous after effects of missing a roll. All of these things can coexist. I don't dislike somebody because they like this magic system over this magic system. One of the things that we always used to look forward to in Dragon Magazine was new spells, right? Gary's soapbox, give us some better ideas about how to better run a game, and so on and so forth. And the one thing that I would say that the OSR community is missing at this point is that we don't have a central repository. We don't have, and I don't say that there should be one company that holds OSR in its clutches and manages OSR. That's not my point. But it would be great if there was a website sort of devoted to OSR where curated is the word I'm going to use, where they did a spell of the day from submissions within the community and they put it forward. And they gave you the bare bones stats so that you could adapt it to whatever system you liked. Or monster of the day. You could do spell of the day, and then you could do monster of the day the next day, blah, 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 go back and forth. Publish some adventures and so on and so forth. The Call of Cthulhu community has Yog-Sothoth. And Yog-Sothoth is the place to go for anything Call of Cthulhu. The OSR community, there were several websites, and again, this is a discussion for a later time. There were several websites that were absolutely a key part of the OSR community coming together and sort of going in this direction or going in that direction and so on. But if we're going to talk about it, like, you have to recognize that the OSR continues to go forward. It's not going to stop. It's going to continue to grow and mutate and change and spin off new games, and somebody else is going to come along and publish something. I remember in the late 90s, how many of you remember cheap ass games? These were
the little bag games, the little
white envelope games with simple printing and simple instructions and so on. But the most popular of those is Kill Dr. Lucky, which is essentially, it's a game about what happens before the game of Clue, where you're one of the 7 suspects trying to kill Dr. Lucky and get away with it. And everybody made fun of these weird little games, but James Ernest sold a shit ton of these things and made money hand over fist. And his margins were unbelievably wide because he was printing on little simple things of pencil and paper and so on and so forth. There's always got to be room for something new, and there's always got to be room for variation and so on and so forth. I love, sorry, over my shoulder again, I love Old School Essentials. I think it's cool. I have copies right there, but I haven't played in an Old School Essentials game in the last 2 years. And that doesn't mean that I don't like it, but it also means that whatever the next thing is that comes down the park, like a couple of years ago, or comes down the pike a couple of years ago, I didn't know what Shadow Dark was. I got Shadow Dark. I like it. There is some game that I don't know about right now that within the next year and a half, all my friends will be like, have you seen this? And I'll look at it and I'll thumb through it, and it'll probably be at the Black Blade table. And I'll go, okay, this looks cool, and I'll buy that. But that's another good example, right? So Black Blade Publishing single-handedly made a lot of these companies viable. They are the ones that championed them. They are the ones who showed off stuff and committed to things and so on and so forth. And they've brought a lot of small publishers. They've brought a lot of products from smaller publishers in front of a lot of eyeballs at conventions over the past 10 years. I mean, they were one of your first vendors at North Texas, weren't they, Mike?
Yeah, they were there the first year we had vendors, which is year 2. Well, actually, I take it back. They were year 1. They were year 1, our first vendor, and then they had a booth from year 2 on. But we didn't really. Our first year, we just had people set up and like, hey, we're selling stuff, and they were there selling things. So
and I think that's critical too, right? Because as we're kids, we all remember that one hobby shop or that one bookstore that carried Dungeons and Dragons, and it was the only place for miles and miles around. A lot of the OSR materials don't get play in your local hobby shop, but they did get play at conventions from dealers like Black Blade. And I think that they're another reason when you have the same vendor going to 3 or 4 major shows. They were always at GaryCon. They've always been at North Texas. They were repping the booth for Goodman at Gen Con. You know, there's 3 shows right there where they're getting a lot of traction and they're putting your OSR products in front of people for the first time, and they're selling a ton of stuff. They're selling an absolute shit ton of stuff. And this is why we talk about this on the show, the adage of the cover is what sells you the first book, but it's the contents that sell you all the subsequent books. You know, Jim Wampler's Barbarian, his Scientific Barbarian, is a great example of this, right? The cover is amazing, but what keeps you buying Scientific Barbarian is what's inside and his curated collection of what's inside and so on and so forth. So I think I love the OSR because of what it has meant to the hobby. I think there are frankly some grognardia, and I don't mean the website. I think there are some grognards in the OSR who are cranky old men who want to fight, and that's okay. Every community has them, right? But for the most part, the OSR has been a tremendous boon to the RPG industry in ways that perhaps the theater kids don't understand.
I want to take us on a little trip down memory lane if I can. We can make the so
wait, hold on. You want to?
I'm not doing time tunnel.
if you've got oh yes, the star. I remember it like it was yesterday. So the beginning of North Texas and actually the beginning of GaryCon coincides with, I'm actually wearing a GaryCon shirt today, coincides with the beginning of the OSR because we look at OSR came out in 2006. And so the godfathers of the OSR would be Stuart Marshall and Matt Finch. And then if you want to go to the fathers and you start adding, you know, Gonerman and Proctor and, you know, Swords of Wizardry, Labyrinth Lord, Basic Fantasy RPG. There was a lot of smaller names. And now, Eric, I sent you a link to the site that lists all the D&D retro clones, and go ahead and post that if anyone wants to check that out. It's unfortunate it's not in chronological order, which would be really cool. It's just in here.
Oh yeah,
here's what we have
on here.
But so all this stuff was just starting to happen, and we decided we would do North Texas, the North Texas Con, and we wanted Matt Finch there because he did Swords of Wizardry, and that was the new hot game. Now I'm going to show you this artifact here. This is the very first Swords of Wizardry module, Spirebound and Crystal. Not only is it the first, it is the very first printing of the first module.
Oh my God!
It was played at North Texas, the first North Texas, and actually, according to Matt Finch, the first game he ever ran at a convention. So the beginning, so a lot of conventions, if you look, they started popping up at this time because people. I told the story a lot. One of the reasons we did the convention the way we did it is we wanted a convention that played old school games. I went around the whole United States, looked for conventions with old school gaming tracks. I found one, and that was Total Con, and they had a room where Frank Menser ran 1E games. Now, I'm not counting Gen Con because Gen Con has all kinds of games. I'm talking about just conventions where there was an old school track. Everybody was playing 3E at the time. 3E was king of the jungle. Everybody was playing 3E. There was no old school tracks at all. And so we said, okay, we're going to have old school games. And then, are we just going to do 1E, 2E? It's going to be pre-2000. Wait, hold on. What about these things called retro clones? And so Doug and I thought about retro clones, they count. You can do because that's basically, it's emulating the old school. So at the same time this was happening, GaryCon, they're just as old as we are. They're going to have their 18th year next year, just like we do. Did the same thing that spring. They're like, hey, we're gonna. We had the Lake Geneva gaming conventions, and they had GaryCon 0, which is the year that Gary passed, the year before North Texas, and then they decided, hey, we're gonna have our own convention too. So they did the first GaryCon, and which featured retro clones there too. So if you look at the explosion of all these small cons pop up, and they're all over the place, and we could go on all night. You know, we've got this year I've been to T-Fest, I went to EggCon, Eric went to Central New York Con. I mean, we've been to a lot of these smaller, just more. There's Dave Con, there's Arn Con up in Minnesota. I mean, they're just popping up everywhere, popping up like zits on a teenager. They're everywhere in the United States now. I know.
That's not the image I wanted, but okay.
Zits on a teenager who just ate 3 Whoppers at Burger King and wakes up the next day. So
you're not making it better. You're making it worse.
You're not helping.
I just want to see Jim's expression if it changed at all. But no, so that was, it was all intertwined because there was this movement, and Eric and Jim also talked about the blogs. The blogs were a huge part of this. Grognardia. Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I mean, that's what the morning I would wake up, click my blog feed, and there's my 10 blogs. It was Jeff Reitz had his, and then Joe Block had his. Joe the Lawyer had. Joe the Lawyer had a blog. I mean, all these guys, and it was always old school.
Joe the Lawyer, Wondrous Imaginings.
And they would have free stuff up there, free magic items, free this and that. Here's an adventure I wrote. Here's this and that. And it was this huge explosion of creativity by people that I think had been felt tied down the last 8 or 9 years, because all there was out there was 3E. And it got so bad that my local game store, my group still played 2E. We came in to run a game in one of the rooms there, and we were told by the owner of the store, you can't run games we don't sell here. And you guys are playing 2E, and we don't sell 2E. I mean, it was like full on, we're pushing you down. We don't want anything to do with your old school games, old man.
We're Americans. Do you not understand that when you tell us we can't do something, we're going to eagerly embrace it and make it?
We worked out a deal with the guy. Yeah. We said, look, how about if we buy dice and stuff? Every time we come in, we'll buy stuff, and we'll buy miniatures. We'll spend money here. He's like, okay, you can spend money. And then we picked the day. We picked a weekday when we were all off work, and that he had nobody in the game room anyway. But that's the atmosphere at the time. I can't tell you. I don't want to say prejudice, because I don't want to equate prejudice with what was going on, but it was definitely, they were keeping the man down. It was the old man down, not the man, the old man. And it was this huge explosion. People were like, no, we can still play these old games. You couldn't get the books. The books were very hard to get. At the time, WotC did not have PDFs. They had PDFs at one point, but they yanked them all. They yanked all the PDFs. There was no PDFs of the original Player's Handbook or the white box. And they were expensive to get online. You had to go on eBay and buy $35, $50 Player's Handbook. It was not easy to play these games. The OSR or the Metro clones made it easy to play these games for people who either wanted to play them and they didn't want to use their old books. They wanted to teach other people without having to buy the whole group of first edition Player's Handbook, or people that had heard about old school games, but let's say they just started gaming in 2000. They had no clue of what went on before that. But it was an unparalleled time of just imagination, of innovation, just all the different, Eric will probably cover this in his videos, but just the fact that you had all these different, like almost like cults. You had the you're going to do a thing on Targa. Targa's funny. I mean, that's the whole thing. But you had the Lamentations people. You had the Zach Smith people, because he was doing his crazy thing off here, D&D with porn stars. But then you had the Greyhawk Grognards and the old school guys. You had the guys that were doing more kind of sci-fi. Like that was kind of Jeff Reitz. He was doing the sci-fi weird game RPG D&D stuff. But it was all old school. The whole feeling was old school. What's his name? The guy that does Fight On magazine. Fight On was a great periodical.
Fight On.
Which, by the way, it's still being published now. It's being published again, at least.
It's back, and I bought the compilations. I won them at auction at WizardCon.
But talk about a book that thick of just adventures, rules, characters, and these were all just. I don't think did he pay for any of this, or just people just donated? Say here. Run my adventure.
I'm pretty sure people donated. It was pretty much like Matt Finch and Knoxville. Which, by the way, I do take credit for killing Knoxville, because my first published article was in Knoxville, issue number 7, where I published a bard class.
It killed the night. That was the last issue.
And then that was it. No more.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate that.
But anyway, but that's just a
and I can date it because I had copies to give away at my non-bachelor party.
And you said, "Here's the
It's like,
last
hey,
issue. I killed this." He handed it to people.
I killed it.
Here's the tombstone of Knoxspell. No, but anyway, so it was all this whole, and this I'm talking about like 2008 to about 2010. It was an amazing time to be gaming, especially if you were an old school gamer, because I'm going to tell you, you went through the desert from 2001 through 2007.
You did.
I mean, really, literally, there was nothing for you out there. I was reduced to the point where I would buy DCC even though it was 3 because it was that old school flavor stuff where they had the Errol Otis covers and the Rosloff covers. I was like, well, it looks the same. And then you read the adventure; they're very linear, they're old school, but it was all 3E. I mean, you'd had to convert it to 3E, so they were fun to pick up. They kind of gave you a little juiced up feeling, but it wasn't the same thing. Once the OSR stuff started coming out, once Matt Finch started releasing stuff, he released Tomb of the Iron God. He released Fire of Iron Crystal. Once Gonerman started releasing stuff for free, or for free at first, then it became. He still has very cheap downloads if you want to get some.
Oh no, no! I think all
Still
the PDFs
free?
are still
That's
free. It's at cost. It's at cost on Amazon, and the at cost is a little bit higher on drive-through because the costs are different. But if you're going to get it on Amazon. It'll ship Prime if you've got a Prime account. So if you want unlimited OSR gaming material,
but I mean, maybe not the best written stuff, but it's plentiful and it's all out there and it's all old school.
Most of it's pretty
Laboratory,
but they do a great, and the rules are great.
Even though Proctor never published, I don't think any Laboratory modules. A lot of other people did, and they labeled it Laboratory. So you went from like I said, you were in the waste. You walked in the wasteland for 7 years, and then all of a sudden, these little trickle of water here and there, and here's a green plant, and here's a bush. And then you kept walking, and all of a sudden you go in this valley, and it's just green, verdant. As far as you can see, there's wildlife there. And that's what it was like living in that time period. And when the OSR finally came around, you're like, oh my God, it's really happening. And they had the craziest retro clones. There was one called, was it Mazes and Medusas? It was D&D old school, but it was set as if the old school was Greek and Roman mythology, not Tolkien.
Oh yeah,
it was very imaginative. I mean,
original D&D was
Greek inspired. And then they had one guy did Ronins and Ruins, which was a samurai based one. I mean, everybody had their own take on the OSR, the old school rules, and so you had all this stuff going on. And like Jim says, some of it wasn't very good. Some of it wasn't, was okay. It's like anything else, like Judges Guild. 15% of it's great.
Right.
30% of it sucks. The rest of it's okay. It's good stuff. And that's kind of how the OSR was.
But now, and here's the thing, and I want to give credit to Matt Finch when we're talking about this. A lot of those alternate OSR rule sets were built off of Swords and Wizardry Core.
Ronins and Ruins.
Why were they built off Swords and Wizardry Core? Because Matt allowed that to be distributed for free in RTF format. So you could put it into Word, you could put it into Pages, and edit the crap out of it, and it was all open game content. All right, so Matt literally said, "You don't need an SRD. Take my rules and have at it." So much of this growth at that time, because I can picture the covers of other Swords and Wizardry influenced games that I picked up because Lulu would always have a sale, and you were always buying stuff on Lulu, and the debt that this community owes to Matt Finch because of Odric and Swords and Wizardry and giving that document out to people.
Anyway, but that's really my experience with it. I always look the North Texas RPG Con, and I think honestly Gary Con also is inextricably woven in with the beginning of the OSR and the renewed interest people had in old school gaming and old school games, because that was a big part of the early GaryCon appeal, was you could play these old school games. Hey, Tim Kask is running a game, and Ernie's running a game, and all these guys are running, and they're running original type games, or they're running retroclons. That was a big part in what made GaryCon grow. Which makes it kind of sad that that's not that big a part of GaryCon anymore. But I digress. Luke's doing his thing, which is cool. He's doing all right. But it's just not. That's not their. That's not their ball of wax anymore. They've moved on. We're still stuck in the 2009s, and we're still doing OSR stuff. But I don't, and I know Eric's, one of the way I got to know Eric was his blog. He had a blog at the time too, and I started reading Eric's blog and like, oh, this is another guy here's another guy that loves old school stuff, Chicago Wizard, his stuff, all these guys, and it was an essential part of what created the whole community back then. And what Jim said earlier about it just kind of splintered off. That's what we're going through now. We're going through the splintering now. It's all now you have stuff that's more esoteric. I mean, what's the one that Gaming Pundit does? It's arrows and so. I mean,
he's got a number.
He's got one that's like Indian. It's based on the arrows of India. I mean, you've got splinters on splinters on splinters. You got really targeted, OSR stuff now. It's not just really broad, like, hey, this is exactly like, 1E, or exactly like, no, this is like, oh, it's exactly like BX if this happened and we do this, It's
all people's house rules.
Yeah, basically, yes, very much so. People's house rules written down to the point now where, and we've all seen this question asked before, do we really need another OSR clone, or do we really need another rule set? Because people ask that, and on one hand, you understand why they're asking it, because there's a lot of ground that's already been covered. You keep thinking, look at that list I sent Eric, or the link, and you're wow, I didn't know there's as many retro clones. But on the other hand, there's still room for innovation, because look what's happened the last few years. Shadow Dark, OSE. I mean, there's been some really good Dragons. I think Greg Gillespie's Dragon Slayer is really good. There has been some really good OSR rule systems in the last few years. There's still room for this. And then you have not even just old school rule systems. You have something like Mothership, which is not, it's not an OSR game, but the roots of OSR are in there,
Oh, it feels to me much like if Traveler and Aliens had a child, and Gary was overlooking.
It's almost like you're pitching a movie to somebody. Okay, it's Traveler and Aliens, and Gary Gygax is writing the script. Now, go. That's what you got. I mean, that's how a lot of these games are now. You take like three, it's if Jeff Grubb was writing D&D and he did it with Ernie's Dungeon, and that's how these things are. Now they're getting to be so individualized and so closely tied into house rules that you are getting these really, really specific type, systems and settings. But that's not bad at all. I mean, look, there's something for everybody, I mean, Jeff Twain had Hyperborea. Jeff Twain's like, what if I made a gaming world that really just relied on Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, and Lovecraft, and there was only humans, and because look, dwarves and elves are scary. They're evil. I mean, they're bad things, and they're fairies, and fairy kingdom, and I don't want, you're just a human. And the world's cruel and it's unforgiving, and Crom's on his mountain, and and so
Crom does not care.
He doesn't give an F. No. And so that's Hyperborea, but it's great. Hyperborea is a great game. And so you have all these different takes on it. And like I said, Eric said, it's just basically house rules. But sometimes you look at house rules and you get great ideas from it. I run 2E, but I have house rules from all these different guys. I pull in some stuff from Dragon Slayer. I pull in some stuff to Lane. I've got some Swords and I mean, I pull in as much things. I have a what do you call it? A carousing system. I think it's a great rule. I love carousing. Dreg has carousing. Shadow Dark has carousing. I think it's a really fun and cool mechanism, especially at lower levels, because you get to where like, oh my gosh, you need 100 experience points to go up. The DM's not going to cut me a break. All right, time to go out carousing. Let's see if you can get that 100 experience points. And then you spend your gold and you roll on the chart and you wake up naked in front of the church of Leo and oh dang, and you're found by the priest of the church, and they're saying, dude, you're gonna go on a quest for this.
You're gonna pay for this, buddy. You're going to pay for this.
But you get your 100 experience points. You went up to second level. It's great. But you were buck naked in front of the temple. They have a task for you, and you better go do this task because we are pissed about this.
There's a price to be paid for your carousing.
So anyway, that's my take on it. That's kind of a historical take on how NTRPG Con's kind of all rolled in there. And a lot of, look, for a long time, the only place you could get OSR games, and I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you this, was North Texas or GaryCon. That was it. Other game conventions just didn't. They didn't even have an old school track, much less an OSR track. If you wanted to play Swords and Wizard, you came to our con, or you went where Matt Finch was running games in his Mega Dungeon.
And I also think that part of this also coincides with most nostalgia hits at about the 25-year mark. And at the 25-year mark, we're talking roughly 2005 to 2008 for the peak of when Dungeons and Dragons was really, 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 really in vogue in the United States. And again, people look back, hey, Mom, Dad, did you throw out my old D&D stuff? Well, yes, we did. We put it in a garage sale, and somebody named Meinhardt bought it all for $10 and talked us down from 20 to 10 and then ran away chortling something about a vampire queen. And so people look back on that, the market of collectibles was not as severe as it has become, and they wanted to go back and kill monsters and get treasure, and the OSR movement was there, and it helped them do that. This all goes hand in hand. So
absolutely, and like I said, go over that list that's at retro. I mean, there's some stuff. I look at some of the names here, and they take me as such a nostalgia trick. Blue Home, remember Blue Home? Blue Home was awesome. Blue Home was emulated the Holmes version of the D&D rules. If you wanted to play Holmes version rules up to level 10, you played Blue Home, because that's what Blue Home did. It was awesome.
But that was actually not the first, and it wasn't even the second Holmes.
Home 77, Home 76, and 77. That's right.
Home 77
yes.
was the first Holmes retro clone, and that's the one that Vince Florio built Mazes and Pearls off of. That won to go down the next year.
And Home 77, that was one of the first things I saw that actually, I think that took you up to level 10 or 12 or something like that, which that was always the criticism about the Holmes says, well, you only go levels 1 through 3. And Holmes took you higher than that. But then remember the Microlight games? The Microlight, I don't remember how many of those there were.
They were based off the 3XSR with the Microlight, which was
like Microlight 74, Microlight 78. Was there Microlight 80 or 82?
There were like 7 or 8, because he did that stuff, and then he also stripped down 3X. He also did a version of Continual Light, which I had people asking me why I stole his stuff, and I'm like, if you look at his, it's based upon my work, but whatever. Yeah, no, it's he did a lot of whoever did all that Microlight stuff did a lot.
It was there wasn't 6 stats. I think it was only 3 or 4, and it was a very basic stripped down version of the old school games. But they had, like I said, they had all these different flavors. Like we were saying, it was all house rules, and this is how you would do it. I'm trying to find the one that I really liked. That I thought had a lot of I thought it was Mazes and Minotaurs or something. I can't find it.
I mean, I'm looking at this. Delving Deeper is white box.
Delving Deeper was huge. I remember that was real big for a long time.
Yeah, that was real big for a while.
It might not be in this list, but they had some really innovative. The Mazes and Minotaurs one was really innovative because because when I thought of D&D, I went back to what I knew about kind of classic type game. It was always the Greek. I loved the Greek legends. I loved read about all the Greek heroes and stuff. And it surprised me when I played D&D, and it wasn't as much about Greek legends as it was about like a Tolkienish type of setting, or Conan. And there really wasn't a lot of shrift given to the old Greek stuff, which I loved. I had read the Odyssey and the Iliad, all that stuff when I was a kid. I read all the Greek legends. So this was a really great retro clone, because it's like, okay, what if Gary, instead of basing it on his Appendix N, didn't have Lord of the Rings and Conan, and it had, these great old Greek legends in there, about the Minotaurs and the Medusas and all the Perseus and all those Theseus and all those heroes. So that was a cool. I thought I would have played a campaign of that in a second, and that was one of the appeals of this style was that you could do things like that. You didn't have to worry about being commercially successful, because let's just say this, kids, nobody was making money in these days. The early days, nobody was making any money off this. These were all labors of love. Absolutely every last one of them was a labor of love.
I think that's the painful truth behind all of this, right? That a lot of RPG companies, I'll say a lot of the OSR companies, there are some that have brought some remarkably great products to the to bear. They, like, again, Old School Essentials, Osric. You can look at a long history of fabulous projects, but at the same time, the ones that made, I'll call them, a reasonable living wage, are far outnumbered by the projects that it's literally just somebody who's like, you know what, I want to release this thing in the wild and I want to see it go, and I want to do this. I can think of all these different zines and projects like this and so on, where you're just essentially, I'm at a convention and there's the guy that's got a little table with 25 copies, and I'll skip my coffee or I'll skip supersizing my Happy Meal just to help this guy out and buy something and get it off of his table.
But Jim, doesn't that take you back to like the years between like 74 and 78, when you had all these zines? You had Alarms Excursions, you had
yes,
a Wild Hunt, you had all these zines that came out, and they were just like, look, this cool box that came out, but there's only this one little box of rules. So let's think of new character classes and spells and monsters. And that's the feeling you got reading a lot of these later zines also.
Yeah.
You get the same, like you said, you went to a table at a convention. I'm going to grab something here that's kind of along the lines of that kind of, just happen to have this on my shelf here. Hold on. This is a guy that comes to the convention still, but this is a put together box. So here's a box you put together. This is Swords and Six-Siders. If you have a copy of that, these are so super rare. One dice. You used a 6-sided dice. That's it. It came with a cup. Oh, look at these. A few adventures.
Right.
Just, oh my gosh, look at that. It's like somebody's, high schooler did the artwork.
We don't discuss what illustration you traced to get your cover illustration.
Exactly. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm like, Jim, I'm a sucker for that. I'm a sucker for somebody doing a zine, and I've showed you I've got a pile of zines over there, because I'm like Eric. Zine Quest come around. I was rubbing my hands together like, ooh, what kind of zines can we get this year? But it's very much that same feeling, the 74 to 78, 79, back when Gary was like, wrote a letter to Alarm Excursion, says, this is great. You guys are doing a great job. I love this. And then, 2 years later, it's like, stop publishing D&D rules. You're doing it wrong. Because then he got corporate at that point. He was corporate. And he was like, I don't want to see any AD&D rules in this magazine. You guys are doing it all wrong. And, and that's kind of what happens to the hobby. It starts out, back of the napkin writing rules, and it ends up you're fighting in a court with a bunch of lawyers over who owns Wendigos and webs. We thought of the name Wendigos and Webs before you did. No, you didn't. I wrote it on the back of this napkin. See, it's right.
And no good comes from this, right? That's the hard lesson that nobody's learned, is that nothing good comes from dragging the lawyers into it.
No. I no idea.
No clue. I don't try to speculate on this stuff because you know what? There's nothing you can do that's going to change how fast it's going to come out. There's nothing you can say to anybody that's going to get them to talk about it before the project ships. I sort of view this as a little bit like Christmas. Do you really want to know what you're going to get for Christmas? Because my guess is if you want to spoil those surprises, yeah, I got nothing.
Well, somebody asked here, and Eric might have a better handle this. I mean, I know a little bit about this.
Right.
The kids are making money on Hackmaster, and that was so. Do you want to tell the story about how Hackmaster came to be?
I'll tell it real quickly. So, TSR, and this is when TSR was its own entity under the Wizards of the Coast umbrella. TSR put out a 250 issues of Dragon magazine, the 7 issues of Strategic Review, onto CDs. I have my set.
Mm-hmm.
I was missing a CD. I found it. Yes,
Yes.
you can get it all on the Internet Archive. Figure it out yourself. But amazing stuff. I cherish it. But it has a number of Knights of the Dinner Table strips inside. And when Kensico licensed their strips to Dragon Magazine, it didn't include rights to whether it was reprint rights or additional media.
Oops. And here comes the lawyers we just talked about.
So that was a big oopsie. And by the way, David Kenzer did respond to my video, and hopefully I sent him a PM. We'll see if over the next couple of days we can get on a page because he says he has stories to tell me. I'd love to hear them. But my understanding is that lawyers met, and David could have been one of those lawyers. He's a lawyer. And lawyers met, and the contract that was signed said, listen, you can take the AD&D 2E rules, the 1E, the whole kit and caboodle, but it's got to be parity. Now, whether that was an offer made by Kenzer's side or whether Watsy said, but somehow that smoothed things out enough that they weren't going to be in direct competition with Watsy's new 3.0. So that's why Hackmaster had those extra hit
And they even got the rights to do the original first edition modules as parody. They have their versions of Tomb of Horrors. They have their version of
there's some awesome adventures. My understanding, and again, I say my understanding, this is the research that I've done, but I haven't spoken to anyone involved in the contract. It was a 5-year contract. So it kicked in I believe 2000 or 2001. It lasted 5 years. And then they went and they put out Hackmaster 5th edition. Now, somebody had said, well, I believe that Kensico, they wanted it to be parody, and it wasn't part of the contract. If it wasn't part of the contract, they wouldn't have changed it to dead serious for 5e. But also, apparently, the contract said if they did their own work for 4e that wasn't building off of AD&D's adventures, just the rule set, they didn't have to do all parody. And also, they got the Calamar with the Kingdom of Calamar.
The Kingdom of Calamar,
got the Dungeons and Dragons big, huge logo, official content on it. That was all because of that little.
Right. So it had a short, like I said, it had pretty much a 5-year shelf life when they could do first and second edition stuff, and after that they tried to go legit, and it just wasn't as successful as the original Hackmaster because everybody was in on the joke, the Hackmaster joke. Everybody loved it. The covers were great. The parodies were hilarious. I mean, Keep on the Borderlands one, if you get a chance, buy that one. It's freaking hilarious. I mean, not hilarious. I mean, it's hilarious in a good way. It's funny because they take a lot of the themes of Keep on the Borderlands.
It's not Greyhawk Castle hilarious. It's not the one that you cringe at with gummy bears attacking.
No, it's actually funny stuff because it's like I said, they take some of the original Keep on the Borderlands and they expand it probably more than it should be expanded. And so that was the story on that. They had a license, they did it, and then once the license was up, that was I had heard, we could ask Dave someday, that they had actually tried to renew the license in TSR. Watsy was nope. You got it for 5 years. You did it. You're done.
I believe it was. That would tell you that it was successful enough that Watsy didn't want the competition.
I think it was I think it was pretty successful at the time. I remember they sold them in our game store. They sold really well. People would buy them, because they looked old school and because if you wanted to play, one of the original adventures. Back then it was kind of hard to find D1. Well, guess what? Hackmaster had their parody version of D1 that was really the same map and the same monsters, and it would just have a little couple of in jokes here and there.
Take off the extra 20 hit points or whatever it is.
It would just be fun. The Bouncing Betty fireball spell. You took that out.
Oh, you got to leave that in. Come on, you got to. That's the fun stuff.
So that's the story about that. So that's. Like I said, if we got Dave on, I bet he would have some great stories about that.
Like I said, I've gone down some rabbit holes doing this research. And one thing I've learned, by the way, is ChatGPT is great for research with the caveat that you better have more than just layman's knowledge of your research because it won't give you – I didn't find anything false, but, man, it will leave stuff out. And you're like, Like,
Yeah,
what?
I'm sure that's probably true. That's why it's funny, because people that try to write articles about a subject that, like, if it was Jim about model trains or me about comics or games or whatever, you could always tell when they've got a chat GPT, because you're waiting for them to mention subject A and they don't ever mention A. They mention B and D and F, and they don't mention A and C. And you're like, okay, somebody either did zero research here, or they asked the computer to do the research for them, because they've left out some of the most important parts of what makes this hobby. And so, and usually it's somebody writing for a national publication that can't take the time to actually pick up the phone and call somebody about Jack Kirby. Who's Jack Kirby? I did Fantastic Four. Okay, I'm just gonna get Chat GPT to write me a bio, and then they forget the Eternals, or it doesn't have everything Jack Kirby did, and then people start screaming, "Go! You don't know who Jack Kirby is? You idiot! Command-I! Come on, he did Command-I! Come on!"
Yeah, yeah. I just hate lazy. I hate that kind of stuff. I think it's interesting, of all the products that WotC released in the late 90s and early 2000s, the Dragon CD-ROM set is the one that caused them the most heartache and the most pain. And why they thought they could just reprint anything, I don't know. I think that's a good indicator. I think that's a good indicator for the professionalism of WotC at the time. They were growing fast, they were throwing bodies at problems, and just because they thought they could do a thing, they did a thing.
Well, there was a lot of things in that 90s run leading up to when WotC bought it. There's a lot of reasons why WotC bought it, because there was a lot of really bad decisions made at the time, and that lost the money. Because the other famous one is the Encyclopedia Magica, which is honestly one of the best things that TSR ever published. It's a 4-volume set of every single item that Magic Item Dungeons & Dragons ever published in any module, any magazine, any rule book, going all the way back to 1974. They're all in there. If you want to find a magic item in there to stump your party, just flip through the pages, and there are hundreds and hundreds of items in there. The problem was the books were so nice. They had these faux leather covers.
Yeah.
They had a little red ribbon thing. They were put together really nice. They lost money on every one sold. They lost money. It was so nice. And the price point, I think, was $25 an issue. And I remember talking to somebody at TSR, and I think it cost them $27 to print.
It was madness.
So they were losing $2 every one they sold. They had this awesome kick-ass thing.
They love us. We're popular.
I'm glad they did it, because look, I use them all the time. They were right by my desk until I cleaned my office out. They're in a box right now, my reference box. But yes, they're the greatest thing ever if you want to look up magic item. But yes, they lost the company money. So there was not a lot of quality control at the time. That's back when TSR stopped publishing for 6 months and wouldn't tell anybody why. And my Dragon magazines weren't getting to me, and everybody's wondering online on AOL what's going on at TSR. And it was mum. Nobody would say a word. And then you got the great news that WotC bought them. Like, oh, okay, good. Somebody that knows what they're doing. Bought Lorraine out. She went to go live on an island and God knows where. And then Peter took over, and thank goodness he was a good dude. And he did right by the game, So, but yes, there was a Dragon Dice. Anyone? Spellfire cards? Anyone?
Oh, didn't they bury Dragon Dice? Isn't there like a pit
Dragon Dice sold well initially, but the problem was the follow-up waves were dead on arrival. And it was that was the big problem for Dragon Dice, right? There's landfills in Wisconsin filled with product that just did not go well.
At Spellfire, they suffered from the return policy, right? If I remember correctly, the first sets came out, people bought them, like, okay, yeah, Spellfire. And then I don't know if anybody ever played the game. I never met anybody that played Spellfire in my life, and they kept pumping them out. And then came the great return thing, when everybody, all the companies decided to return stuff for full value, and they started getting pallets and pallets and pallets of Spellfire decks. They're like, oh my God, we published this much Spellfire? Yes, you did, and none of it sold. It sat on the shelves of Walden Books for 2 years, and then they sent it all back to you, and that was part of the oh dear God, we've effed up. We've really
We've
effed up.
created a monster. Well,
Yes.
and that's the problem with book returns is that going into the book market puts your products in front of a lot of people, but you have to be prepared for what happens if you have the kind of returns that the book market can generate.
Mhm.
And that's a different beast than hobby shops where they pay it, and once they own it, they're stuck with it.
And so according to, I talked to James Louder at a Game Hole Con a few years back. According to him, he was writing some of the novels, and the novels were actually probably the most successful part of the company for quite a while. I mean, you had Salvador writing, you had Grubb, you had Greenwood. I mean, you had some, and these guys, all their stuff would get on the bestseller list. So it became such a scandal. The New York Times bestseller list delisted TSR novels and put them on. They made an entirely new list called fantasy and science fiction because they got tired of pulling up the New York Times bestsellers. The first 10 books were all TSR novels. It made them look like they weren't sophisticated, and there wasn't anything by some sophisticated New Englander with a pipe who wrote a personal journal about his.
I just love listening to your New England accent. It hurts me to hear that. I'm not even from New England.
Yeah. But I had a personal trip to the Antarctic, and I wrote about my feelings along the way, and it got to number 3 on the bestseller list. And now I'm teaching college up here in Michigan, and it's terrible, So yes, they got so mad at that. They said we have to do something. They delisted all the TSR novels. They created a whole new category which they probably should have done years ago, called fantasy and science fiction. But they were so successful. But anyway, James Lauder told me towards the end of Lorraine's run, she stopped paying royalties. And so the royalty checks started getting less frequent. Then they disappeared entirely. Then they started piling up, and guys like James Louder and Salvatore like, now you owe us this, now you owe us that. And so one of the first things he said to his credit that Atkinson did was pay off all the royalties of the authors, which is once again tells what a great guy Peter was at the time. But yeah, so they had a lot of issues going on back then. A lot of issues. And we're actually very lucky in our hobby because God knows I followed enough sports teams with absolutely shit ass owners that just don't have. I'm a Cowboys fan. Do I need to say any more? I don't even know. Need to.
Wow.
So the chances are that TSR could have been bought by God knows who, and they could have just turned it into an absolute pit, and it could have gone under in 3 years. Because they didn't know what to do with it. And thank goodness Peter and Watsy bought it, and they, came out, and now here we are, 25 years later, we're still playing it. We're still talking about it. Even if you don't play the modern versions, all tides raise the ship, blah, blah, blah. We have the ability to play this retro clones because of the OGL. So it's great. So it worked out good. And like I said, you don't get that lucky in some hobbies. Jim can probably tell you stories too about the hobbies he's been involved in look, we're all Marvel and DC fans, and God knows that has been an the bed for the last 5 years in the comic book world. I mean, it's so bad. My granddaughter is, I've talked about her a little bit. She's 17 years old now. She started getting into comics. She loves DC superheroines. She Catwoman, Batgirl, Wonder Woman. That's her thing, which is great. Is me as a comic guy, I love to see that. So she's reading it, and so I said, well, and so she's reading this stuff, and it's like from the early aughts. So she's collecting. She reads like Chuck Dixon, Birds of Prey, and this. And I was like, well, don't you read anything, newer? She goes, Papa, that new stuff sucks. It's like, wow. The new DC stuff. She goes, I don't read anything. When they started New 52, which I think was in 2011, she goes, I don't read anything past that. It's all garbage.
It's all garbage.
Okay. Right. I'm like, well, there's your indictment of the hobby, the comic book right there.
Jonathan Miller has a point. He said something in the chat. He says, it's an irony of history that Arneson probably made more money from TSR D&D than Gygax did. I'm just going to say, I don't really think that's true. And I'll tell you why I don't think that's true. And I'll just give you the case in point of B1 to B2. So many of us love B1 In Search of the Unknown. It was one of Mike Carr's greatest things I think he's ever written. It was not keyed with treasure or monsters so that the DM would a fledgling DM would do that himself. But Mike Carr got royalties for his copy of B1 for B1. And he was getting some royalty checks because every copy of the Holmes box set had a copy of B1. And when they released it separately, it sold like hotcakes. And Gary, sitting in his office on Three Springs Road, was looking at his sheet one day and saw how much money Mike Carr was making on residuals for B1 and had an oh shit moment. And that's why B2, Keep on the Borderlands by Gary Gygax, came out. Because lo and behold, it then replaced B1 in every basic box set, in the Holmes box set. It became the fundamental basic module forever. How many printings, Mike? 12, 13?
I think it's considered the most printed TSR module of all time. It had the most printings and the most amount of print. I mean, it's the largest printed module of all time, however you want to put it.
And as is well documented, the whole reason that Gary lost control of TSR, and John Peterson has written about this very eloquently and has the chapter, The Ambush on Three Springs Road or whatever.
Skirted Springs Road, yes.
Yes, is that the Blooms said to Gary, you get a residual on everything, literally everything. And we cannot now the chicanery of the Blooms, we've spoken before about the nepotism. We've spoken before about the cousins.
There's no heroes in this game, Jim.
There are no heroes.
There's no good guys here. The
Blooms said to Gary, you got to stop this. We got to cut back on the residuals because it's carving out a giant chunk of cash and the company can't survive. I'm paraphrasing. That's not the phrase. But the Blooms essentially say to Gary, like, one thing's got to give. Something's got to give, and that's got to be your residuals on all this stuff. And Gary said no.
Being Gary, flipped him the middle finger.
And Gary said no. And this is what led to Lorraine buying the Bloom shares and getting the majority and owning TSR.
And by the way, hearing this story, Lorraine, I mean, for what she wanted no part of Gary in there. He was destined to be gone the minute she got there. She had heard about him and wanted no part of Gary being part of TSR.
Yeah, and come on, I don't want to get into an Arneson discussion tonight. I don't have the stomach for it. I'm not up for this. Let me address something else in the comments. Disney bought Fox. They stopped royalties, including Alan Dean Foster. As we have opined before, Alan Dean Foster is the guy that if you needed a movie novelization, if you tossed the script at him before it hit the floor, he had finished the movie novelization. and so in the 80s, he wrote a lot of novelizations. He wrote the first novelization. He wrote the novelization for 1977 Star Wars, but it was credited to Lucas. But Foster's the one who wrote it.
Did he write the first Star Wars novel, which is Splinter of the Mind's Eye?
Splinter of the Mind's Eye, yes. Yeah. He wrote that because before they were greenlit for a sequel, they cut the contract because they liked what he had done with the novelization of Star Wars, and they let him play with the Kyber crystals and so on in Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And then when they made Scrooge McDuck levels of money, they said, well, we're going to do Empire Strikes Back, and Splinter of the Mind's Eye is interesting, but now we're going to shunt it off over.
And if I remember correctly, Splinter of the Mind's Eye might have had a little sidetrack of Luke and Leia that became unpalatable.
Yes, there were some problems with Luke and Leia.
Get a little squeaky
romantic feelings.
Yeah, if your brother.
And we should not discuss this. And Luke and Alan Dean Foster's not dead, folks. His wife died, but Foster's not dead. He's a good guy. Like I have a lot of respect for Alan Dean Foster. He's a really great.
I've got these right here. Doug had given me these years ago. I haven't read them yet, but this is his trilogy.
Which ones?
Journeys of the Catechist.
Yeah, so I mean Foster was the first. Foster is an interesting product. He was a college student in the late 60s. He wrote his first published work was a letter he wrote to August Dearlith as a joke. And he sent it in to August Dearlith at Arkham House. And Dearlith liked it so much, he published it in the Arkham Collector. Then his first few novels are what set up his version of the future history of mankind. So he came up with the Commonwealth and he enjoyed a lot of early success with the Tar-Iam Krang and Blood Hype and so on and so forth. And each book built more information, baked more information into his shared world. There was Ice Rigger, all this stuff. Good.
He wrote effortlessly. I mean, his stuff isn't great, but it's workmanship. It's workmanship's great, and it's if you want a nice book to, like Stephen King used to refer to his books as the Big Mac of horror. Alan Dean Foster is the Big Mac of sci-fi. You pick up his book, you're going to get a good read. It's not going to be the greatest thing you've ever written, or read, but it's going to be pretty good. So I had heard that about him. That's really sad about Alan Dean because Disney can afford to pay residuals. Good Lord, and afford to pay royalties. That's just ridiculous. Well, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe they can't anymore. All their Marvel movies are losing millions of dollars. Maybe they can't pay anymore. Who knows? But Arneson. So if you read Peterson's book, the last one he wrote that had the Sheraton Springs story, and it's a great book. He talks about a little bit about what happened to Arneson after he left TSR, and I didn't know that story. I thought it was true. He lived in Texas. I didn't know he lived in Texas. He worked for, I believe, either Martian Miniatures or one of the miniature companies for a while in Texas, and he moved here to be closer to the company. But he had a string of so he reminds me of he's the one-hit wonder rock star that all the other labels keep signing, hoping he's or let's put it. No, here's a better one. He's the guy that won Rookie of the Year, and he had a great year in baseball, and yet he fell off the map, and everybody keeps signing him, hoping his arm he can win another 20 games. Maybe he can win 20 games. He kept getting contracts after D&D, and his bullet point was, I created D&D, and he just never lived up to the hype. He could never produce anything that made the kind of money D&D did, that had the kind of impact on society, or a lot of times he didn't even produce anything. He'd get hired by a company. They'd hire him for a year to come up with some ideas. He'd have 2 or 3 ideas, and they're like, no, we don't want to do any of these. And they'd pay his contract, and off he'd go. So he did, he may have gotten screwed in some aspects, but he did very well in his after D&D days when it came to contracts. He did very, very well. Jim, we can't hear you. Oh, you can't hear me.
I'm sorry. So Arneson was working for Mainsail, wasn't he? Wasn't he? He was working for one of the two, not Digipin. He was working for their competitor in Florida when he passed away. He was an officer at because my only encounter with Arneson at Dave Sutherland's funeral. Yes. I've told this story before. Mm-hmm. I'll spare you all tonight. But he gave me, when he introduced himself, he's like, "Well, I'm Dave Arneson," and he made sure that the three of us got his card, and I still have his card somewhere. So.
But what? How come I can't remember Peterson's book? It's the last big one he did, not Playing with the World, but the other one, the one about Gary's last days there. He does a very good summation of Arneson's, from like 79 through about 80, whatever, when he kind of had gotten pushed out, and then he won. He sort of kind of won his lawsuit, and actually won the lawsuit, and that's why one of the reasons Gary had AD.
And everybody should take the time to look up the Arneson filings, because I think I shared the link with you at one point, but the link of all the evidence for the Arneson lawsuit is a spectacular read. As we're getting into the fall and you're going to be stuck inside when it gets colder, you really need to read the entire PDF of evidence introduced in the
Game Wizards. I couldn't remember the name. John Peterson's Game Wizards. Yeah, read that book if you're interested, because like I said, he paints a picture. And look, John is very even-handed in what he writes. He doesn't have a dog in the fight.
Axe to grind.
No, not at all. And he just says, look, here's a guy that, he had a lot of chances to recreate his one-hit wonder, and he just never did. But he did very well when it came to every 2 years somebody would sign him to a contract hoping he could recreate the magic. And he had Adventures in Fantasy, which nobody played or ever played, and he had some miniature lines that were you've probably seen the back of the Grenadier where it says, "I approve these," and co-creator of D&D, Dave Arneson. I mean, so he had plenty of chances, and he just ended up just being a working stiff, just like a lot of us, because he just could not recreate that magic. But no, he did very well. He did very well financially those years.
I was in my gaming group meets on Monday nights, and a discussion took place on Monday night where this very subject came up, and this is why, like, multiple statements can be true at any given time, right? That when you look at, and this goes right back to how we started the show, right? That talking about wargaming in the late 60s and early 70s, and how Dungeons and Dragons came to be, and how you had multiple gaming groups that were playing around with this sort of proto rule set. People were publishing things in what became known as the Domesday books. There's a lot of interesting ideas. One of the things that makes miniature gaming easier is if you have somebody that runs the game, I'm not on either side. I'm just the person making sure that this is facilitated and goes well. And that this begat the idea of a dungeon master or a game master, right? So Arneson and Gygax are, we always talk about this. They were very human people. There were foibles. There are things that people don't like to hear about either of their. You can't put them high on pedestals because they're human beings, right? They are just human beings. But one of the most interesting stories that I have ever heard, if you see Tim Kask at a convention, you should, under no circumstances, ask him about the time that Dave Arneson turned in the manuscript that he was supposed to turn in.
Yeah, off the record, it's a good story. Yes,
because Tim Kask will magically transform in front of you, and he will begin growing the dorsal fins, and you will begin to see him charge up like Godzilla, and then the radioactive flame will pour from his mouth when he talks about Blackmore, because TSR asked Dave Arneson to submit the manuscript of Blackmore, and Dave Arneson showed up at the TSR offices and dropped a bunch of loose paper. And Tim Kask's percentage of how much he wrote Blackmore, I'm not 100. I can't remember what the percentage is, but I'll throw out 60%. And if I'm too
so Jim, this was we talked to Steve Marsh, who also worked on Blackmore.
Yeah.
He did the monsters. Steve Marsh backs up Tim's story 100%. And according to Steve, by the way, Steve is the most honest. Once again, no axes to grind. No, Gary loved the guy, whatever.
Right.
He says that basically he and Tim wrote Blackmore because it was in a peach basket. He dropped it in a peach basket on the desk and walked out. And they're going, what the blankety blank is this? And so Steve and Tim had to put it together and make it make sense. And
but literally, I mean, and this is a story that encapsulates a lot of what I would call the Dave Arneson working experience. I have heard this from multiple people. I have no reason to doubt Tim Kask. I have no reason to doubt Steve Winter. I have no reason to doubt
Steve
other
Marsh.
people.
I'm sorry, Steve Marsh.
Yeah, I have, and Steve Winter had similar stories. I have no reason to doubt any of this, because these are the people. You may want to fight me over this, but I have no dog in this hunt, and more importantly, the people that are talking about this are the people who were the nuts and bolts to make sure things got published. You know, they have no reason to make up this stuff and so on and so forth. My story of Dave Arneson at the funeral.
Oh,
right.
God.
I don't want to recount it tonight, but Arneson had a lot of opportunities. And Arneson, in a lot of ways, seemed to be the guy that stepped on his own earlobes. And I don't know why, right? And I cleaned up the metaphor because, kids might be up this late. I just
watching our show. My God,
I know.
Put that kid to bed. Good Lord.
But let's go back to this, right? So Arneson's roots in the hobby are very much like what a lot of the people in the OSR were like in the mid 2000s, in the 2010 era. We'll say 2010. And come on, right? Like there was a kid named Kelsey playing games around Wisconsin in 2010, 2015, somewhere there. There's somebody that we don't know who they are, who's playing RPGs at some place in the United States or Canada or whatever right now, who 10 years from now is going to become a game designer and release something that's just going to sweep a bunch of stuff in front of it like a wildfire. We can't predict who that is. But the best part of all of this is that it comes from the roots of our hobby. We sort of circle around to all of this stuff. It is circular, and that's okay because we have a hobby filled with interesting, creative people who come up with ideas and share those ideas freely. And then after they've shared those ideas, try to figure out a way to monetize them, mostly not successfully. And that's okay too, because this hobby gives as much as it gets and gets as much as it gives. And I'm okay with that. So we've spent a lot of time going through circles on this stuff. Why don't we talk a little bit about Diamond? There's been some interesting developments about Diamond.
Can we please talk about Diamond and
Let's talk about Diamond.
The cluster. It's such a cluster. Eric, you want to summarize?
This is Jim's specialty. Jim has been on top of Diamond.
Right. So the most interesting thing is that one of the publishers finally said, "I'm done. Screw this. I'm out." And I would say that's a financial factor. That was Image Comics that essentially reached some terms with the creditor, or reached the terms with Diamond. And Eric, what were their terms?
And whatever they had to do, they had to pick it up themselves.
They had to pick it up themselves.
Or take stock.
So there's going to be a bunch of stuff on sale for Black Friday at Image Comics online. Trust me, they're going to want to turn this stuff around as fast as possible and get it right back out. I think it's interesting that Image decided, and interestingly, Image is a part of DC, i.e. owned by Warner Brothers. I think it's very interesting that somebody at Image said, screw it. Like we want to get out of this Mongolian cluster truck, and walked away.
That makes sense, because they said you can keep some comics, we're going to take some, and we're done. And that was probably probably a pretty good idea. Just say we could probably win this. Do we want to spend? How much money do we want to spend? How much time and effort? Because in the end, this is just paper. It's old comics. We can reprint comics. And Image isn't they're a big publisher. They can probably take the hit a lot better than some of the smaller publishers can. And so they could have. I thought it was a pretty smart deal for them. And now, sadly, the other publishers are going to have a harder time, because the story this week is Diamond decided they're going to sue the publishers, the comic publishers now.
Which is kind of like what it. I mean, the debtor, or not the debtors, the consignees. Though the publishers that had given their comics to Diamond to sell, basically formed a group, and they filed a motion that was accepted. That, you're going to have actual actions taken against each of you. Well, Diamond is doing that, basically. And the article, I think, said alphabetical order.
I looked at, so I'm going to read off some of the names here. This is who they're suing for failing to properly secure their interest in the co-signed goods by filing a UCC financing statement with the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. So they're suing them for what we told you for months is the problem here is these companies did not follow a UCC statement. So they're suing for that. So the companies include, I'm just going to get off names everybody might know: Dark Horse Comics, Goodman Games, Green Ronin, Heavy Metal. There was one other. Paizo is on there. Titan Comics, and I thought there was one. And Val Entertainment, and Zenoscope. I mean, there's some names you've heard there. So yes, we've all Goodman and Green Ronin and Paizo are all in there too. They're all having lawsuits, and I think this looks like, I don't know, Ty could probably tell us better than anybody, but this looks like one of those, we're suing you, but in other words, we would rather you settle with us, but we're going to sue you to maybe hurry up the settle.
Yeah,
Well, I think it's also a monetary loss, right? Lawyers ain't cheap.
Nope.
I think again we have to look at who owns the property. We've talked about the overall over the octopus, the specter-like octopus over WizKids and all these other companies. Who's got deeper pockets? Who has deeper pockets to go into? And kids, if you don't know this word, lawfare. This is warfare using lawyers. And don't kid yourself, right? There are people watching this show. There might even be people on this show who have experienced lawfare in one way, shape, or form or another.
Yeah, that'd be awful.
It's dirty.
It is.
So you have
who's got deeper pockets, and how hard and how deep do I have to go before you scream?
So you
lawfare is ugly.
You basically have three sides now. You got Sparkle Pop, you've got the Diamond debtors, and you've got the companies. It's like a disease that's spreading like through the pandemic. It's like
pandemic. You have bankrupt. Here the thing is, you have bankrupt Diamond, which is not really the new Diamond that was bought out, because bankrupt Diamond wants to sell inventory on auction, but new Diamond, apparently under Sparkle Pop, has been selling inventory and not giving the monies to the publishers. So this is a bag of shite in multiple directions.
It says the Diamond debtors. It doesn't give names, but I assume the Diamond debtors would include Chase and the company that are owed money by. So, gosh, this is deep pockets. This is the worst kind of lawfare, Jim. It's deep pockets lawfare. It's going to be an absolute
It'll be a bloodbath. It'll be a bloodbath, and it's just going to take away operating capital from companies that don't have operating capital to spare.
And I mean, I'm just going to speculate here, but I think the reason that the debtors are suing the smaller companies and not Sparkle Pop is because Sparkle Pop has too much money too, and they're suing smaller companies that I know they're all banded together, but maybe they can't match the dollar amount of the debtors, which, like I said, I know they include Chase and probably some other big companies, and they're figuring they can get a settlement out of the smaller companies a lot quicker and easier than Sparkle Pop, because Sparkle Pop, for what you said, Jim, they're a gigantic company also.
Oh, believe me, right? We've talked. It's not Sparkle Pop that's the overarching company. It's
I just can't remember the name. It's just Sparkle Pop.
Yeah, but like Spectre, there are many legs to this octopus, and they have clearly demonstrated a desire to jump on vulnerable areas of the market and exploit that powerfully. This is somebody in the chat who said that they publish with Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
I was told that an invoice I sent after their bankruptcy belonged to the estate of Diamond and not Sparkle Pop, who owns them now. Yeah, I just, let's not forget that Diamond Comics.
By the way, this is Preston, good guy, Preston, and Preston, he's getting screwed. He's one of the small guys we talk about.
Most of the comic stores that did business with Diamond Comics were on terms where they had to write a check or pay via credit card before their order shipped, or they had to pay with a check to UPS when the order arrived. And let's not forget that Diamond did this because internally, Diamond knew that the average life of a comic book store in the United States was 2 years, 18 months to 2 years. And so the turnover, and I combine two words, the churn and the turnover, the turnover of comic book stores in the United States at one point was 80% a year. And Diamond knows that these people were coming and going. And so Diamond put them on the most restrictive terms where Diamond got paid. No matter what happened to your shitty little comic book store, buddy, Diamond's getting paid. Mm-hmm. And this is why we've all seen those little comic book stores that pop up in your hometown for a year and then they're gone. And all that stock winds up in somebody's garage or basement. It's just like those multi-level marketing people that you try not to go to the parties with, but it's the same kind of thing. I'm really I wish that publishers had the clout to put Diamond on similarly restrictive terms, where Diamond didn't get the inventory until Diamond paid for it. But Diamond knew it was the 800-pound gorilla and acted like the 800-pound gorilla, and frankly screwed over all these publishers. I am sorry to hear that. It pains me every time. But Diamond's practices are 30 plus years of documented fuckery. And I wish it wasn't the case, but it is. And it breaks my heart to see companies, there are game companies that are listed in the defendants and the ones seeking action and so on and so forth. I have stuff from probably most of the defendants on the bookcases behind me or in the other bookcases.
Mhm.
And I wish it wasn't the case, but you can't change it. You just can't change it.
It sucks. And like the people that suffer, the guys like Preston and Pocket Jack, the small, it's just a small comic. It's just a mom and pop comic company. And that's what a lot of these smaller companies that aren't even on this list that I read, there's a bunch of names I didn't read, Ablaze, Action Lab, Aspen. I mean, these are all smaller companies, and they're the Boom Studios. They're not that small, but they're all going to suffer because they're going to lose all their stock. They're going to lose everything. They're probably not going to get anything back. They're not as big as Image to be able to leverage anything. And they're going to be, that's just money down the toilet. They're just out money. I mean, it's not like you burn up in a fire and you can declare, insurance or whatever on it. And of course, now they're getting sued. Oh, by the way, now we're going to sue you because you didn't sign the UCC form too. So your fault that we're not getting money from the company. I mean,
yes. And there's still some raging Arneson discussion. I would really just point out this, right? Whatever you do, don't deify Gygax or Arneson. Just don't. Like if you haven't read John Peterson's books, you need to read those books. And more importantly, as even-handed as fair as John Peterson was, you also need to really read between the lines. Because
there's a lot that isn't said in plain English that you can infer. Look at the numbers, by the way. The numbers tell a lot when you read those books.
If you want to be fair, D&D would not be where it is today without either of these men. It had to have both of them together at the same time, playing. I mean, it was just this zeitgeist. It just happened. They met. They compared ideas. They worked together. If there wasn't both of them there, it would not have developed the way it did. It developed the way it did, because they were both there and they both had their ideas and they both blended their ideas. And so it's really hard to say, well, success begins here and ends here, or this guy was more responsible because he did this. The guy, it's just because both of them together.
You needed the both. Or else the meal never would have been made. Here, I'm gonna throw a curveball.
And who did what? There's not an easy 50% this, 50% that.
Not at all.
You can't.
It's they're not like this together. They're intermeshed.
Yes.
Yeah, they're intertwined.
They're intertwined. But here's a curveball. We never even discussed this one, but I just saw there's an update on this story. So I'm sure many of you heard about the $1.5 billion settlement with the Anthropic AI company for using the equivalent of the Trove to fill its AI beast with information. Well, they settled for $1.5 million. Well, apparently yesterday the judge rejected the settlement.
Oh,
because he said there's too much that hasn't been discussed, being left for later. There are potentially 500,000 authors affected by this lawsuit. And the judge wants to make sure that everything for those 500,000 potential claimants is taken care of. And he felt the attorneys on both sides were kind of just trying to Let's just get this over and done with.
Gloss it over. No, and Rob Conley says it's not deification to say that Dave invented tabletop role playing. I don't agree that he created tabletop role playing. His campaign was the one where it came together, but there were two very distinct groups of people cross-pollinating. Yes, he had the first campaign, but there were also linking adventures. And when I talk about deifying, I don't mean the two of you in this chat, Jonathan and Rob. I mean the people that we see at conventions who are determined to wage their new wars over this stuff, because it's just, I don't have time for it. I don't have time for it. Mike doesn't.
I said in there that, without Gary, the game would only exist being played around the table of a few aging gamers in Minnesota and Wisconsin who never got, without Artisan, Gary would have had chainmail. It would have been a totally different game. It would have been D&D. It would have been a chainmail, a war game with magic, right. And once again would probably be played by a bunch of aging gamers around the table.
It never would have been codified.
You need both of them.
Listen, like you cannot make Oreo cookies without the cookie and the Oreos. You don't have it. You needed both pieces to come together here, or else you'd have nothing. It would have just died off. I don't want to eat icing without the cookie. And I hate the people that just eat the cookie separately because it tastes like crap. It doesn't taste like crap.
Or how about just they lick the icing off? That's gross.
Oh, yeah. That's not the way. You got to eat the...
Gross. All those wet, slimy, black... it's just gross when you do that. Don't do that, folks. Eat the whole freaking cookie or don't eat it at all. Just go get them. You know what? Go to the store, go in the bakery aisle, get one of those things full of icing, open it up, get home, open it up, take a spoon, just eat the freaking icing. Leave the Oreo cookie alone. Stop molesting your Oreo cookies by licking the icing off. Just go get a bucket of icing and just scoop.
Don't get a bucket of icing.
Public service announcement. Public service
just
announcement. Stop. Because you're picturing a pile of wet, licked Oreos in a pile on a table.
But it's not even really wet. It's not even.
My grandparents raised me, and when I was, I don't know, 7 or 8, my grandmother had a kidney stone and ended up in the hospital for a couple of nights. And my grandfather, who was not the person to prepare meals, was left in charge of trying to make sure that the grandkid got fed. And there were 2 eventful things that happened for those couple of nights that she was in the hospital. Number 1 was I got to see Kelly's Heroes for the first time, and I love that movie ever since. Great movie. But the other is that Monday Night Football was on. And Monday Night Football, my grandfather didn't see it, but I snuck the bag of double stuffed Oreos onto the couch next to me, and I ate the entire bag of double stuffed Oreos. And I can't begin to tell you how sick I was, but I think the phrase that really sort of sums it up is, I think I vomited up my toenails.
Oh,
and so when you talk about this stuff, I'm done.
You would have done it again.
I can't do it. I'm out.
So what do we learn here tonight? Don't eat. If you're gonna just lick the frosting, just go get a tub of frosting. Don't ruin a perfect good Oreo. Otherwise, Jim will get sick eating a bad one. That's what we learned.
It's not the same frosting.
No. Jim will get ill if he has to eat a whole bag of Oreos. So don't do that. Don't lick the Oreos clean. It's gross. You could dip them in milk. That's what they're made for, basically. Dip them in milk. You can, but yeah, don't dip. Don't lick the Oreo. So yes, like Oreos, this belabored comparison as we work it over in the back alley. This comparison. Dave and Gary together. You had to have them both. I know people. I've seen the most creatively constructed arguments that no, if fill in the blank had just had control, it would have been just as good because blah blah. No, it would not have, because each one each one contributed a look. If Gary hadn't been in there, you would have. I mean, some of the early contributors. Rob Kuntz was a huge early contributor. You would have lost all Rob Kuntz's contributions, and he, as much as sometimes he could be a pain in the ass. When he was a teenager and playing Gary's game, he had a lot to say with the creation of DD. You'd have lost all Gary's friends that had anything to do with that. If you just had Gary, you'd have lost the whole Minnesota side. You'd lost all of Dave's stuff. You lost the whole concept of Blackmore and have Dungeon. And I mean, you have to have them both together. As Eric said, you're doing this. You're not doing this.
Don't make me do an episode on this shit, all right?
I wouldn't work. And like I said, and I've heard, look, I've seen people practically come to fisticuffs over this at conventions, and Jim probably has too, because he goes to Gen Con where there's a lot more lunatics that go to Gen Con.
Oh, every convention has the lunatics. Every convention has the lunatics, and the worst ever, right? There's the cartoon, there's the New Yorker style cartoon where the guy's in bed surrounded by his family. And I shared this before. I have it on my phone, but it's the guy on his deathbed saying, I really wish I had argued more about editions of role-playing games. and I can't tell you, like, every time I have some nitwit come up to me and talk about Sainted Gary or Sainted Arneson, I just think, no. Like, they both made incredible contributions to the hobby. Like, I think Gary, Dave had these ideas, but Gary was the one who executed and brought it to life. Whatever. Okay, fine. But when I look at all the contributions that these two people made, when I look at the human beings that they are, when I look at all of this, I don't feel the need to become a patron, a patron cleric in the Church of Dave or the Church of Gary. I just don't need to do this. I got other shit to do in my life, and that's not on the top of my list.
Both men, they did their part. I mean, you shouldn't deify. Like when Jim talks about deify, he means like, well, this one could do no wrong. You don't look. Yes. They both had issues. They both had flaws. I mean, and I wanted to go into here because I don't want to get in this conversation, as Jim probably doesn't want either. But I've heard stories, Gary, over the years by people I absolutely trust. I've heard stories about Dave over the years by people I absolutely trust. And neither of them were, shining examples of the best of all humanity. They were regular human beings. They were gamers. They're regular human beings.
Okay.
They're regular dudes.
Let me put a pin in this right now by just saying there are times you should not meet your heroes. And when I say that, I mean there are times where you can meet people and they're pleasant. And as long as you go into it with the lowest of expectations, you're never disappointed. But there are times where, unfortunately, we go into a situation where we have built somebody up in their mind and they turn out to be somebody entirely different. And not now. At some point, when somebody in the RPG industry dies, I will tell a story from 1999 about somebody meeting their hero.
Oh, boy.
And I will tell all the details of this story, but it is the story that when people ask me about, hey, what do you think about this? I say, don't meet your heroes. Like, go into it expecting them to be a human being, right? I met Michael Whalen. Michael Whalen was a nice guy, but I didn't go into it thinking that Michael Whalen had painted the Sistine Chapel. I love his artwork. I think he's amazing. I think he's one of the most successful illustrators of the last 40 years. But I have reasonable expectations. I met Larry Niven. First time I ever met Larry Niven, and I was so excited to finally meet Larry Niven. And Larry Niven, Larry lived down to my expectations because he grunted. He was just like, here you go. Like he wasn't very friendly. He was just shooing people through the line. And if I had gone into it like, oh my God, it's Larry Niven, I would have been heartbroken. But I went into it like, oh, I hope I get autographs. I got my autographs and I got out. Stan Lee. I've met Stan Lee one time, and I was pleasantly surprised at the experience that I had with Stan Lee, because I went into it expecting nothing. And what I got was a very sweet little moment with my son and Stan Lee, and then we got out, and it was perfect.
That's great because he's, the amount of people that try to interact with Stan, that's so wonderful. You did that. That's great.
Yes. It was brief and that's it. I think if you watch this show, we say constantly you need to pare down your collection. Don't inflict it on your family when you're gone, when you're whatever. I think one of them is, when you meet people that you admire in the industry, make sure that you just couch your expectations that they're human beings, and you won't be disappointed.
Because they are. They're just regular. Look, a lot of them, they operate in a very special time and part of our hobby, but they were just regular guys that just happened to be in the right place at the right time for the most part. I mean, they just, I tell you what, one of the greatest guys to talk to, you talk to Alan Hammock, just one of the nicest guys ever. And he is absolutely realistic about, look, I got a job there. I worked there for 4 or 5 years, and I went and did another career. It was lucky enough to be there.
But it didn't define who I am as a person.
No,
right?
It's just something he did, and he did it, and he doesn't. I mean, I think if you nailed him down, he wouldn't say Ghost Tower Inverness is the greatest thing ever written. He loves it. He still runs it. I got to play in his EggCon game this year, but he knows his place in the hobby. And there's guys like that. And then, as Jim and Eric knows, there's other guys that maybe misremember their place in the hobby.
There may be people who frankly just blow it out of proportion in some ways, or frankly, have to be announced.
Frankly, I agree. Yeah, very, very frankly, I agree. But
Italy. No, never mind. Okay,
never mind.
Satine Phoenix for one of them, but
I
really digress there. But by the way, that's one of the heroes that I met that I was disappointed. No, I'm just kidding. She's never my hero. Never my hero. Hashtag.
You got close enough to meet her. That circle.
I met her. I said hi to her once. Yeah, she was very pleasant. But
actually,
that was actually before pre-Jameson. Pre-Jameson, because Jameson ruined her, from what I understand. So
the great story, the great Satine Phoenix story that doesn't get enough play, but is really, really, really just wonderful, is that there's a collector I know who met her at GaryCon, and this was before Jameson, right? So I think it was the first year she came to GaryCon, and everybody was all excited because Satine Phoenix was there. And this collector does not, or at the time was not watching Critical Role, was not watching whatever was going on YouTube and so on and so forth, but had heard about her and was, like, and spent some time on the internet looking at Satine Phoenix's YouTube videos and her channel and so on and so forth to familiarize himself. But the first time that he ran into her at GaryCon in the hallway and was like, "Oh, hey, I'm really familiar with your early work." And the problem is that Satine's earliest work was in what we'll simply say the adult entertainment industry. And so he says this, and he did not know about this. And he says this, and she looks at him like she goes from, "Hi, it's nice to meet you," to, and she just goes stone-faced and turns and walks away. And he did not understand what he had said. He didn't understand what he had accidentally implied. But my God, we've given Matthew an unending amount of shit about this for the last few years because, oh my God.
It's not like he says he also enjoys water sports, because that would have been kind of.
Stop.
Oh, that would have given it away.
Oh my
you didn't
God.
say that.
Stop. All right, so Mike.
Before we go really off the rails, should we get to my top five?
Oh, let me get my 5 CDs. I'm still laughing at water sports.
All right, do you want me to go first? Because I got a couple of things. All right, so let me go first. So I have 2 things this week. If Mike covers the sound, I'm going to cover the video portion. So I've got 2 things this week. Number 1 is, holy crap, Batman, the animated series. Now, this is the original series from the 1990s, folks.
Oh, that was
cool. The complete animated series on Blu-ray, you can get it at a bargain price. It's worth the price of admission. This is how we were introduced to Harley Quinn, and we've all suffered Harley Quinn ever since.
Oh boy.
But it's just the perfect animated series from the 1990s. Kevin Conroy as Batman. Nobody else has equaled that same gravelly voice, and it's the foundation for all this other stuff that came. If you've never watched it before, You can watch it on HBO Max, but really and truly, the animated series is just legendary. And I wanted to mention that. I was moving some stuff around. And then the other one, which I watched once on cable, and I found myself enjoying it far more than I should. But did you ever wonder what would happen if Porky's met a zombie movie? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse.
I think I saw
Oh
that.
my
My
God.
If you haven't seen it, it's a lot of fun. It's not a deep thinker. It certainly won't ever win an Oscar. It's better than winning a Razzie, but really and truly, it's about a group of Boy Scouts that, when zombies are inflicted on their hometown, rise to the occasion. Yes, it's got a few gratuitous boob jokes, but all in all, it's a reasonably watchable film. Make sure the kids are tucked in, but you could do a lot worse.
All right.
That's
Too
all I
good.
got.
So I have returning from last week are Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. I'm mainly listening to the second disc, which is all songs that were cut off the original. And I'm more listening. I realized why they were cut. They're mostly very slow, kind of gospel-y, bluesy. And I think with Exile on Main Street, they really wanted a more rock sound. Because if you listen to Exile on Main Street, it's a double album, and all the songs are rockers. And I think they cut a lot of the more soulful stuff. But it's really good. So I would advise buying the anniversary edition with the extra disc. We still have the Cars. Now, this is a 2-disc set. So I only got through the first disc last week. I'm on the second disc, which is halfway through album 3 through the rest of their careers. And so, 80s, 70s, 80s music, banger, banger, banger. Every song you've heard in the, Touch and Go, Don't Tell Me No. I mean, it just every song in here you've heard. It's great stuff. Very, very nostalgic. Yellow Tango, their first album. It's another week on the list. I'm a big Yellow Tango fan. They're an alternative band. It's not their best album by any means. It's really interesting. It's very crude. They get a lot better as they go along. If you are interested in kind of experimental 80s and 90s alternative music, Yellow Tango is a really good band. But I wouldn't necessarily tell you to get their first album, but it's pretty good. So these next two are new. Dave Alvin. He had a solo album called Romeo's Revenge. Count 1987. He was a member of the band X. He was a member of the band Blasters. He had a punk background, but for this album, it's a country and western rock album, which is really interesting because, like I said, he was a punk rocker, the Blasters and X, and it's really good. His songs they're just very soulful. His voice is good. It sold so badly that the label terminated his contract, and then he went and he joined another band. But if you ever have a chance, Romeo's Escape, Dave album, it's a really, really good album. The songs are very well constructed. It's country rock. And then one of my personal favorite bands we haven't come to yet, Husker Du. And this is one of their albums called Warehouse Songs and Stories. They were part of the big giant 80s Midwest boom in Minnesota. Like the Replacements came from there. There was a lot of bands that came from the upper Midwest, and they hit it big. But every member of this band went on to record solo. Husker Du is some really good, muscular 80s, 90s rock. It's just everything on here is really good. But it's all DIY. It's not very polished. But any Husker Du album, except for maybe their first two, you have a good chance of hitting a good album. And I am not listening to this one very much. It's got a couple of songs that were big. So back in the day when we were kids, they had something called alternative radio, which basically they didn't know what to do. They had old rock, they had disco, they had.
Where do we put REM and Love and Rockets?
I'm not sure. Alternative. That's alternative. Because it wasn't quite rock, but it wasn't country, and it wasn't disco, and it wasn't electronic. They didn't know what to do with it. They call it college rock too. College rock, alternative rock. They were the big alternative rock guys in the 80s and 90s. Husker Du, good, and they're, like I said, all the early stuff's really good. If you like, I'm a big guitar guy. I like guitar music, and they're huge on guitars. It's really good stuff. So,
wow.
Yes, Dave album, the album Blasters. They were in a movie. They were in they were in a couple of movies, but yeah, so that's my 5 albums a week. But I'm going to look for some more Husker Du albums. I haven't listened to their stuff in a while. I'm a big Replacements fan also. I like that Midwest kind of Minnesota.
Did you ever
Wisconsin
listen to the Rainmakers?
Yes, I love the Rainmakers. I'm a big Rainmakers fan too. Yes,
the first couple of Rainmakers albums are just fire. They're great. The first one with Government Cheese and Down by the Levee. Those are amazing. The Bodines.
I'm
The
a really
Bodines
big
are
a really big fan of 80s, and so my music really started the late 70s, but I'm a really big fan of all the 80s, 90s, like I guess you call it guitar rock. I like anything. I like electronic. Okay, I'm not a big like Depeche Mode fan or OMD. I mean, that's like okay. And I honestly, if you listen to those albums now, I don't think they age very well. Most electronic rock from the 80s and 70s, but the guitar rock always sounds good. It just, I mean, it's a good guy and a good couple guys, a guitar and rock it out. That's a Rainmaker.
Somebody
one of
mentioned
those
Streets
bands.
of Fire in the chat, and really and truly, like we should spend a half an hour talking about that movie at some point, because if you haven't watched Streets of Fire lately, like you really, really ought to, because it's an interesting how in the God's green earth did this movie get made.
It doesn't age extremely well, but it's still a fun movie. And it's by the way,
Willem Dafoe's first movie, and he looks like he does.
And shockingly, he plays a psychopath.
He plays
I'm
the
shocked.
character he plays in every other movie he's in pretty much the same hairstyle, right? This awful, terrible viewpoint.
But yeah, the Blasters. That's right. The Blasters were in Streets of Fire. That was the movie.
Yeah.
But yes,
and
then yeah, but yeah, William Dafoe played a psychopath. New story in 11.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. And then God, what's her name? Diane Lane, incredibly young. She's like 18 or 19. She's really, really young in that movie.
There's a lot of young people in that movie. There's the chick that was on. Oh gosh, she was on a bunch of sitcoms. She was real young in that movie.
And Rick Moranis is in that movie.
Rick Moranis is in it. Yes, he's the. So there's. It's a fun movie. It's if you go into it thinking, okay, I'm not going to take this movie seriously. It's just going to be fun. It is. It's a fun movie. It's just got all kinds of. I remember I saw I can't remember who directed it or wrote it, directed, but I saw an interview with him years later, and he said, I always wanted to make a movie where a bunch of guys on motorcycles fight and two people kiss in the rain, and he named like 5 different things. And there's a motorcycle gang, and this and that. And he goes, and I made that movie. And there's a band that's all about a band and this and that. And he goes, and that was the movie he made. Was that was the guy that has all that in it. It has a motorcycle guy. It has a fight with axes at the end. I mean,
the movie that I have not watched the movie Seven in 20 plus years, right? And I recorded it the other day, and on Monday night I started to watch it, and it was too late. I was starting to fall asleep, so I said, "Oh, I'll pass and I'll watch it later." Well, I sat down last night to watch the end of it. I watched the rest of it, and I was only like 10 minutes in when I turned it off on Monday night. But I watched it last night, and Jesus, this is a movie that still punches above its weight. But what's really noticeable is, number one, is Brad Pitt is stupid young in this movie. You know, he is the obnoxious know-it-all kid. Number two is, when you listen to him talk to Morgan Freeman's character, you're like, I have no sympathy for you, which makes the end of the movie even a bigger punch. But what I remember is that the director of Seven, he's crafted this movie that you have to watch it a few times to catch everything in the movie. And I don't want to if you haven't seen the movie Seven, I don't want to be the person to spoil any part of that.
Yeah,
movie.
It's been a while for a while. We're not going to.
But there is a detail in the movie where they took an actor and they had him in makeup and they shot 365 pictures to reflect that character over the course of 1 year. And when Seven was first released on Laserdisc in the big Holly Molly Throwdown edition, one of the things they included was the 365 pictures that you could literally go through and so on. And I was talking about that movie today with somebody, and I said, like when you watch Seven and it is one visceral gut punch after another, there's a couple of things that aren't as good as the rest of the movie. They seem like they were rushed because of events in the movie. But when you watch that movie and you think about when it came out and how different it was from every other horror movie. Like it and Blair Witch are two defining movies in the 90s. But when you watch Seven and you know, if you watch it the first time in the dark, and every one of these little things is just chipping away at you and chipping away at you and so on and so forth, it's just an unbelievably good, solid movie. It held up. There's elements to the movie that I don't want to spoil it, but I'll say a non-spoiler. Morgan Freeman's character at one point goes to a library to do research, and he goes to do research in the library overnight because he's friends with the security guards. And there's a great little bit of dialogue where Morgan Freeman talks about how he says to the security guards, "I just don't understand it. You guys are in this amazing library where literally the wealth of human knowledge is available to you, and instead you sit around playing poker." And the shot of the security guards at the table, at a library table, dishing out cards and getting ready to play their poker game. And one of the security guards is a character actor you'd recognize by sight. And he sort of laughs and he says, "Well, here you go." And he turns on a boombox and begins playing Bach's aria. And the music is filtering down through the library as Morgan Freeman is walking through it. And it is a perfectly crafted scene in a movie with one perfectly crafted scene after another. It's just it
David Fincher's he's a great director. But I'm going to throw you a curveball here. I don't like a lot about Seven because to me I think it's a really well-made movie, and I think the acting, Kevin Spacey's incredible. I mean,
don't spoil it.
He's just incredible. No, he's incredible. But it relies too much on this has to happen exactly this way, or this doesn't happen. And if that doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And I always have a problem with movies like that because you have to suspend so much belief that this person has to be right here at this time, or this person has to make this exact decision right here, or the whole movie's ruined. The entire movie's done. It's all ruined unless these 3 or 4 or 5 things happen all in a row. And I always.
But see, when I was watching it last night, one of the things I think that's a fair criticism to a point. But what we have at the start of the movie is we have the execution of a year. We have the beginning of the rollout of a years and years of meticulously planned events,
right?
And then the left turn to Albuquerque, that leads to what I would call some of the weaker, more rushed moments in the movie, is we have the scene in the diner where, you know, Mills, the Brad Pitt character and the Morgan Freeman characters meet with somebody at a table. Money is exchanged under the table, and there is this sort of whispery, like, well, what was, and Brad Pitt's character is just like a little kid. What was that? What was that? I don't understand. What was that about? I don't get it. What was that? And finally, like every little kid, can we have a pool, Dad? Can we have a pool, Dad? Can we have a pool, Dad? He wears Morgan Freeman down to the next day where Morgan Freeman explains what this is about. And it's a legally indefensible move that Morgan Freeman, who is this sort of bastion of right and order in the movie, he has decided to circumvent the law to try to get a lead. And when he gets the lead, they can't actually use this lead to justify getting a search warrant, but they can use it to sort of knock on the door and just try to get a chat. And that's when things start to go wrong in Seven. That's when things start to be rushed in Seven. And that's when the plot, that's the weakest part of the movie to me. And I think that's the part you're talking about. But
well, there's 2 or 3 parts where I'm saying if the victims just said, no, I'm not going to do that, the whole movie's over. And so you have to, a lot of it has to be that, well, I mean, and plus the ending, the famous ending, everything has to happen exactly the right way or it doesn't come off. If somebody just says, no, we're not going to do that, or no, we're not going to go there, or no, you know, and I understand a lot of movies are built on that. I mean, look, every John Carter Mars movie or book has three people ended up in the jungle. It has a tiger, a girl, and a dude ended up in the jungle at the same time.
Yeah.
But you got, but this movie is set in such a realistic world that to me, I'm like, oh, well, all this had to do this one thing, and the whole plans, it didn't work out. But like I said, it's absolutely incredibly the cinematography is great, the direction is great, I think the acting is great. I just had like I said, one of those things. My brother and I saw it together. My youngest brother, he's a very much a critic, not Robert, my younger brother, and he broke down on the way out why he had a problem with it. I said, I agree with all your points, which was that everything had to happen a certain way or nothing makes any sense. It doesn't work. If one victim decides I'm just not going to do this, then the whole thing breaks down and we don't even have a movie. But I guess that's the point. That's why we have the movie, is because everything worked out exactly the way that one person wanted it to work out. But I always have a problem with movies like that. I like movies where complications happen, or you have like an Ocean's 11 movie, but things get screwed up, and this guy's not.
I think that's
and then they have to improvise. There's no point. There's one point where the bad guy has to improvise. That's when he's almost caught. But other than that, he doesn't have to improvise the entire movie. Everything goes. His plan just goes. And I have a problem with movies like that because there's always things that happen. You're across the street and you fall down. You go do something. You slap your hand on the door. I mean, things are going to happen. They're going to mess your plan up. And I like movies that have the things screw up and there's an improvisation. Okay, our plan's not going to work now. We're going to do this. I love that kind of stuff. And this movie to me was just so much like, here's what's going to happen. It all happened. And then you're done. At the end, you're devastated by the movie because it's so ridiculous, so incredible.
And so, but like, we got to wrap up, but what about North by Northwest, where Cary Grant's character is mistaken for somebody else and the entire movie is based on a misunderstanding?
He's running around trying to get killed.
He's just trying to get away and buy some time. Nobody believes his story. Nobody believes that he was kidnapped, blah, blah, blah. Everybody assumes he's guilty of the murder that he's been framed for, et cetera, et cetera. So we should talk about that another time.
Yeah.
That's a great movie too, by the way, which also has a couple of flaws. The same things I mentioned that, like,
you're my wife.
It's a great movie.
You're my spouse,
Hitchcock
and
stuff.
I'm gonna get in trouble.
I know. Your bladder's going to explode in 5 minutes. I know. 5 seconds.
Come on, dude.
Sorry, we held everybody over. We get excited about movie talk.
I know you do.
Movie talk gets excited. Rob Conley and I do comic book talk. Glenn and I do old movie talk, and Jim does other movie talk. So here we all have our idiosyncrasy.
Enough. We love you, but
Eric's not putting a bucket under the desk.
Good.
We're finished,
folks. I'd have to turn my screen on because you might see the face. Folks, thanks to Mike, thanks to Jim. On the channel, I'm doing a large series of videos on the OSR. It's origin history.
Watch them; they're good.
I'm going to be going off on some like random tangents. It's going to be a hex crawl. Guarantee you that. So if you like hex crawls, you like history, check the videos. Other than that, live streams Thursday, Friday, Saturday this week. I will be on Joe Block's channel on Sunday afternoon as he launches his Kickstarter. So you can see me there too. Other than that, be safe, be well, God bless, roll those dice, roll them well, and I'll see many of you tomorrow.